Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling incidents in Camden County, Missouri's history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and what hours of the day or night these recorded accounts reach are of interest to us. The term Blackwood used to evoke both fear and awe among the Ozarks' undulating hills, where the wind whispers secrets through old trees. And even though time has passed, the shadow they left behind is still there, a somber blemish on a place that has made a valiant effort to forget its past. This is their tale. The hard winter of 1885 saw the arrival of Martha and Ruth Blackwood in Camden County. Nobody could really recall their origins. Virginia was mentioned by some, Kentucky by others. Keeping to themselves, the sisters bought a little two-story farmhouse outside of what would become Camden. The land was next to Hazel Creek, which has black, motionless water in the winter. The sisters were quite content with the 3-mile distance to the closest neighbor. Tall and severe, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, Martha was 4 years older than the others. It was Ruth, who had dark auburn hair and a gentler voice, who went into town to get supplies. The county was in dire need of qualified midwives at the time of their arrival. Expectant moms were left without support during the risky process of birthing after the death of the previous midwife, Mrs. Ella Lennar Tilton, the previous autumn, following Martha's successful delivery of Mrs. Whitaker's baby, a complex breech birth that had the entire village braced for disaster. Word of the sisters' abilities swiftly spread. Upon the successful survival of both mother and kid, the Blackwood sisters were immediately given almost sacred status. Their skills were magical, in a time when giving birth was sometimes a death sentence. They attended 15 births throughout the county in less than 6 months. When labor started, families would send news, and the sisters would show up with their black leather medical bag, which was stocked with medicines, herbs, and tools of the trade. Other than food and necessities, they never took payment. Martha would respond, "God's work needs no coin," yet her eyes never showed how warm she was. In 1952, at the age of 93, Patty Wilkins, one of the few living locals who recalled the sisters, spoke to the Camden County Gazette. Martha stood straight and tall, never looking at anyone directly. "I was just a girl then," she remembered, "but I remember the first time I saw them. It was at the general store." Ruth would nod courteously and smile. Like animals sense danger, there was something about them that made other people give them room without even realizing it. Many in the neighborhood were impressed by the sisters' deep understanding of herbal treatments. Records show that they were successful in treating conditions that had confused Dr. Harper's medical education. In his medical notebook, he wrote, "When I had given Mrs. Summers only weeks to live, the elder Blackwood gave her a tincture that cleared her consumption." Samuel Johnson, whose land had been part of the Blackwood property, later told Sheriff Reed that they grew plants I've never seen before or since, flowers that bloomed only at night, herbs with leaves that seemed to shift color depending on who was looking at them. He also said that he had once seen Ruth harvesting these plants under the full moon, naked, but Reed dismissed this as the wild fantasy of a man who liked whiskey. The sisters' farmhouse quickly gained notoriety for the unusual garden they tended behind it. Sheriff Thomas Reed wrote in his personal journal, which was discovered decades later in the county records office, "The Blackwood women have proven themselves invaluable to our community." Though there is something unsettling about the elder one. When pressed for the ingredients, she merely smiled and said it was a family recipe passed down through generations. She never smiles, even when delivering good news. The sisters assisted in the birth of 27 children by the fall of 1886. By the time standards, it was a wonder that all the mothers lived. All the children were strong and healthy upon birth. But 3 of those babies would be dead by the end of winter. Dr. William Harper, a local doctor, wrote to a colleague in Street Louis to share his worries. "I can find no medical explanation for these deaths. The children simply waste away, refusing to nurse, growing weaker until they slip from this world. The mothers report nightmares before each decline begins, dreams of a woman standing over the cradle in darkness. I hesitate to give credence to superstition, but I confess I am troubled. Winter Crew was blamed for the first fatality, which was that of baby Emma Collins. Timothy Grant, the second, died of an unidentified fever. By the third, Rebecca Wilson, rumors started to spread around the neighborhood. In every funeral, Martha and Ruth stood with their heads lowered in the rear of the crowd. Ruth would cry aloud. Martha stayed calm, staring at the small coffins. The third deceased child's mother, Abigail Wilson, eventually revealed to Reverend Miller a secret she had previously kept private. The night before Rebecca fell ill, I dreamed of Martha Blackwood standing over her cradle. She wasn't alone. There was a shadow behind her, a woman's shape, but with no features I could discern. In my dream, Martha pointed to my baby and said to this shadow, "This one, she carries the mark." When I woke, Rebecca was already feverish. 3 days later, she was gone. Other mothers started to share similar stories. Although Martha had not been in their home since the birth weeks prior, Josephine Grant claimed to have discovered one of her hairpins in her baby Timothy's cradle 2 nights before his death. On the morning when her daughter Emma began to exhibit symptoms of illness, Catherine Collins reported discovering odd ash-drawn patterns on her doorstep. The first multiple birth the Blackwood sisters had witnessed was the birth of twins in December 1886 to Mary and Joseph Peterson. Martha's attitude altered when she learned there were 2 babies, according to Mrs. Peterson's later testimony to Reverend James Miller, which is recorded in the 1887 church record. She grew pale and still. Mrs. Peterson remembered well. She whispered something to her sister that I couldn't hear. Ruth began to tremble. When the second baby emerged, Martha held them both, one in each arm, and stared at them with such intensity I feared for their souls. The twins died within a week. Mrs. Peterson later explained in her private letters to her sister in Springfield, which historian Margaret Wilson found in 1965. What I did not tell the Reverend for fear of being thought mad was what Martha said when she held my babies. She looked from one to the other and whispered, "One vessel cannot hold 2 souls. The doorway becomes unstable." Ruth began to weep then, begging her sister to leave these be. Martha silenced her with a look and proceeded with the birthing as if nothing unusual had occurred. Failure to thrive was listed as the official cause. The pattern was unavoidable by the spring of 1887. Seldom did the Blackwood sisters' babies survive to reach their first birthday. Adulthood was never attained by those who survived infancy. Sheriff Reed started recording births the sisters attended and their deaths in a private book. Although there was no proof of foul play, the pattern was indisputable. Even though the fatalities were unusually constant, they seemed natural. In his March 1887 notes, Reed wrote, "I have examined each case meticulously. The deaths occur weeks or months after the Blackwoods' involvement with the birth. No poison or violence is evident. The children simply fade, as if something essential was taken from them at birth, something beyond medical understanding. I find myself considering explanations I would have dismissed as nonsense a year ago." Meanwhile, Dr. Harper carried out his own research. "I have examined samples of the herbal teas the Blackwood women administered to mothers during labor. They contain common ingredients, red raspberry leaf, chamomile, and nettle. Nothing that could explain the subsequent deaths of these infants. Yet, I cannot shake the feeling that something is being done during these births, something beyond my perception or understanding." He wrote in a letter dated the 3rd of April, 1887, to his colleague Dr. James Morgan of St. Louis University Medical School. The Blackwoods were present when Elizabeth Shaw gave birth to a healthy child in April 1887. When she awoke in the middle of the night 3 days later, Martha was standing over her son's crib. There were no windows or doors open. Martha denied being there when questioned the following day. 2 days later, the baby passed away. Given to Sheriff Reed and documented in his official report, Mrs. Shaw's story added a detail that made even the doubtful police officer shiver. "When I saw her standing there, she was not alone. Behind her was a figure, a woman, I thought at first, but something was wrong about the shape of it. It seemed to shift and change as I watched. Martha was speaking to it in words I couldn't understand. When I cried out, both she and the shape vanished. Not ran away or hid, but vanished before my eyes. I know how this sounds, Sheriff. I know you'll think me hysterical with grief, but I swear on my baby's grave this is what I saw. Trust in the community started to erode. The sisters were shunned by families with little children. Instead of calling on nearby counties, pregnant women started to travel there. But nobody dared to accuse them outright. Suspicions were mounting, but they were overcome by the fear of losing access to qualified midwives in an emergency. The Reverend Miller kept a private journal in which he recorded talks with anxious parishioners. They speak of a curse, that any child touched by the Blackwood women is marked for death. I counsel against such superstitious thinking, yet I cannot explain the pattern that emerges. 27 births, 17 deaths already, the remainder sickly and failing. What darkness walks among us? On the 15th of May, 1887, Miller made another entry in his diary that he never discussed with anyone while he was alive. I dreamed last night of standing before a great door. On our side, what I understood to be the world of the living, stood Martha Blackwood holding the hand of a small child. On the other side was darkness, but not empty darkness. Something waited there. Many somethings, moving just beyond my sight. Martha spoke to them. The exchange continues as agreed. One passes through, another returns. Then she urged the child forward through the door, and as it passed the threshold, something else stepped through in the opposite direction. Something wearing the shape of a child, but not a child at all. I woke drenched in sweat, the words echoing. The exchange continues. The sisters' remote farmstead came under midnight inspection in the summer of 1887. The town's young men would hide in the woods around them, keeping an eye out for any indications of witchcraft or other evil. They described unusual noises carried on the night air and lantern lights shifting between rooms at odd hours. One of these nightly observers, Thomas Granger, eventually swore an affidavit detailing what he said he saw, and he described the sounds as a woman weeping, but not in a human way. It was just past midnight, the moon full overhead. A light appeared in the woods behind the Blackwood house. Not a lantern, nothing that cast a normal glow, but a cold blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The sisters emerged from the back door and walked toward it. As they approached, I saw what appeared to be a doorway standing in the middle of the clearing, a doorway with no wall around it and just a rectangle of deeper darkness. Martha Blackwood approached it, held out her hands, and began to speak in a language I've never heard. From this doorway came voices, children's voices, dozens of them, calling out names I couldn't make out. Ruth fell to her knees, covering her ears. Martha continued speaking until the voices fell silent. Then she turned to Ruth and said, "Clear enough for me to hear. The bargain holds. 33 souls to keep the doorway balanced. We have 16 more to go." Most people rejected Granger's story as the result of superstition and moonshine. According to Sheriff Reed's private notebook, however, Granger was not known as a fanciful man, nor one given to excessive drink. His fear appeared genuine. There is an odd entry from this time period in the county records. Martha Blackwood's complaint against trespassers on her farm. In response, Sheriff Reed told Miss Blackwood that public concerns warrant observation, suggested she consider relocating if this arrangement proves unsatisfactory. Later, Reed told Dr. Harper, as noted in the doctor's journal, "I looked directly into that woman's eyes when I suggested she leave the county. I have faced down armed criminals with less fear than I felt in that moment. She did not threaten or raise her voice. She simply said, 'Our work here is not finished. The balance must be maintained.' I do not know what she meant, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The Reverend's 6-year-old daughter, Sarah Miller, went into early labor on October 31st, 1887. Reluctantly, the Reverend sent for the Blackwood sisters since he had no time to look for assistance elsewhere. The Reverend's diary, Sheriff Reed's official report, and pieces of Ruth Blackwood's personal notebook, which were found decades later under a floorboard in the abandoned farmhouse, would all document what transpired that night. The pastor wrote, They arrived as the moon reached its apex. Martha examined Sarah immediately, her face grave. "The baby is turned wrong," she said. "We must work quickly." Ruth prepared her sister's instruments, while Martha mixed herbs in a tea and made Sarah drink. Within minutes, my daughter fell into a deep sleep, though her labor continued. He went on. "I heard them speaking in low voices, in a language that sounded like no European tongue I know. When I inquired about their conversation, Martha responded that they were praying. But these were no prayers to any god I serve. The room grew cold despite the fire in the grate. Sarah moaned in her unnatural sleep. And then I hesitate to record this for fear of my own sanity. I saw a darkness gather at the foot of the bed, a darkness deeper than the absence of light. It had shape and substance. It waited. The birth took about 2 hours, and Martha Blackwood came out with the baby, a girl, healthy and crying lustily. Sheriff Reed's report, which was filed 3 days later, said, "Reverend Miller claims he was instructed to wait downstairs. He reports hearing strange incantations from his daughter's room. Not prayer, not in any language of God," he insisted. When he attempted to enter the room, he found the door impossible to open, though it had no lock. The fragment from Ruth's journal provides the most disturbing account. M performed the ritual as Mother taught us. The child is marked now, like all the others. I asked again why we must do this thing. M reminded me of our purpose. Balance must be maintained. One life given to us means another must return. But I grow weary of this burden. The mother's cries haunt my dreams. The tiny faces, so many tiny faces in the darkness. Another fragment, partially damaged but still legible, elaborated. M says, "The door between worlds grows unstable. Too many have passed through without proper exchange. Our mother managed only 17 exchanges before they drove her from Virginia. We have marked 33 now. M says we need 33 exactly, a number of power. Only then will the doorway stabilize. Only then can we rest. But I wonder, will we ever be free of their voices? Do the returned ones remember what they were before?" The daughter of Sarah Miller lived precisely 1 year. She had a high fever on her first birthday and passed just before dawn. She was the Blackwoods' 33rd child to be born and the 33rd to pass away. In his sorrow, Reverend Miller spoke out about what he had seen on the night of his granddaughter's birth. He freely discussed the evil elements operating in their town in a sermon that astounded his audience. He said, "I have seen the doorway to his congregation. I have heard the voices from beyond it. The Blackwood women are not midwives. They are gatekeepers to something terrible. They do not bring life into this world. They mark it for return to another." The church elders recommended that Miller take a leave of absence because they were worried about his mental health. He declined, his charges growing more and more bitter. A town meeting was conducted in the church in November 1887. But church records show that attendance fell precipitously in the weeks after what became known as the Doorway Sermon. According to the town record, the subject was the Blackwood matter. Although no official charges were brought against anyone, the community decided to transport pregnant women to Springfield whenever possible to give birth. The sisters were to be avoided, not persecuted. The meeting's facilitator, Sheriff Reed, cautioned, "We have suspicions, but no proof of wrongdoing. The deaths, while tragic, have no clear cause that could be presented in any court. I urge restraint and vigilance, not hasty action that could leave us without midwifery services entirely." Dr. Harper concurred with this viewpoint, noting, "We must remember that childbirth remains dangerous. Without skilled attendance, we risk losing both mothers and infants. Let us be watchful, but not reckless." Reverend Miller was the only one who objected, beating the pulpit with his fist. The uneasy pause that followed his outburst was followed by the words, "You talk of practical concerns while evil walks among us. My granddaughter is dead. 32 others lie in tiny graves. How many more children must we sacrifice before you act?" Following the discussion, A number of parishioners approached the church elders to discuss finding Miller a replacement, since they believed his grieving had thrown his mental equilibrium off. The Reverend Miller wrote in his diary, "Fear has taken hold here. Whether justified or mere superstition, I cannot say with certainty, but 33 children are dead, 33 families shattered. Something must be done, though I know not what." A subsequent entry, dated December 1st, 1887, revealed deteriorating mental health. "I see them now, the children who died. They come to me in dreams, standing in a circle around a door of darkness. They speak with one voice. We were not meant for your world. We were merely vessels, prepared and returned. But something comes through when we go back, something wearing our faces, learning to be human. I wake screaming, and Sarah begs me to seek help. But who can help us now? Who would believe what I have seen?" The 1888 winter went by without incident. The sisters stayed in their farmhouse, feeling more and more alone. Not many went to their door. Then, after a terrible snowfall in February 1888, Emma Blackwell, a young widow living alone on the county's northern boundary, gave birth. She dispatched her lone servant to pick up the Blackwood sisters because she had no method to get to Springfield and no neighbors in the area. The servant later testified that they came as though they had been anticipating the summons. Despite the storm, they had already saddled their horses and packed their suitcase. The pivotal moment in the gloomy tale of the Midwife sisters would be what transpired in that remote cabin. As recounted by the servant in Sheriff Reed's official account, Miss Martha examined Mrs. Blackwell and announced she was carrying twins. At this news, Mrs. Blackwell became greatly distressed, having heard the rumors about twin births attended by the sisters. She begged them to leave, saying she would rather die than have them touch her babies. Miss Martha grew very still. She told Mrs. Blackwell it was too late. The babies were coming, and without help, all 3 would perish. What I did not tell the sheriff was the strange way Miss Martha looked when she felt the second baby. It was not surprise, it was recognition. She said, "Twins again. The doorway seeks balance of its own accord." Miss Ruth turned white as a sheet and whispered, "No more, Martha. Please, no more." But Martha silenced her and proceeded with the birthing preparations. The labor was challenging and continued through the night. Mary Putnam, the servant, later elaborated on her story in a private letter to her sister that Wilson found in 1963. The first twin, a boy, was born close to daybreak. The second, a boy as well, came a few minutes later. They both looked well. According to the servant, Ruth took care of the weary mother, while Martha took the babies to be washed. Depending on the source, the next events would be reported differently. From the adjacent room where Martha had taken the babies, the servant said she heard an odd chanting. She looked through the half-open door and observed Martha mumbling something in an unidentified tongue while holding both babies over a basin of water. She raced to retrieve Mrs. Blackwell's hunting rifle. Terrified. A different version of events was presented in Martha's later testimony to Sheriff Reed. "I was washing the infants, as is proper procedure." The servant girl burst in with a rifle, raving about witchcraft and curses. In her hysteria, she fired the weapon. The bullet struck my sister Ruth, who had entered behind her. Mary Putnam's letter to her sister provided an additional account. "I saw her standing over those babies, drawing symbols on their foreheads with some dark substance. Behind her, God help me for saying this, was a doorway where no door should be. A rectangle of darkness floating in the middle of the room. Something was moving in that darkness, reaching toward our world. I heard children's voices coming from it, crying out in pain or fear. I ran for the rifle. When I returned, Ruth had entered the room and was begging her sister to stop. The balance is complete, she was saying. We have our 33. Let these 2 live. Martha turned to her with such coldness and said, "The door requires more now." "It always requires more." That's when I fired. I aimed for Martha, But Ruth moved between us at the last moment. The bullet took her in the chest. The doorway vanished as she fell. Whatever the reality, the result was recorded in several places. Ruth Blackwood was shot in the chest and died that morning. A neighbor heard the gunshot and called Sheriff Reed, who took Martha into prison. The twins have lived. However, the first maternal death connected to the Blackwood sisters was Emma Blackwell, who passed away 3 days later from childbed fever. Martha Blackwood insisted she had done nothing wrong with the children she had given birth to while she was being held pending trial. In an era and location where midwifery was essentially uncontrolled, the official charge of practicing medicine without the required license was, at best, a tenuous case. Martha's eerie poise is revealed in Sheriff Reed's notes from his interrogations. She sits perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, answering questions directly but volunteering nothing. When asked about the infant deaths, she simply says, "Some souls are not meant for this world. They return to where they belong." When pressed on what this means, she smiles faintly and remains silent. The court documents that followed were found in the county archive in 1962. Due to a lack of proof and community pressure from families who, in spite of their concerns, still needed midwifery services, Martha Blackwood was freed after 2 weeks. In his private letter to a Jefferson City colleague, hearing Judge William Simmons wrote, "The woman disturbs me profoundly." Throughout the proceedings, she maintained a serenity that bordered on the unnatural. When I announced her release, she did not smile or show relief, but simply nodded as if the outcome had been predetermined. As she left my courtroom, she paused beside me and whispered, "The doorway remains open, but balanced now." 33 returned, 33 received. The exchange is complete. I do not know what she meant, but I have been chilled ever since. When she was free, Martha went back to the farmhouse by herself. Local reports state that she got more withdrawn and only came out when called to a birth, which became less frequent as the rumors spread. The Blackwell twins, the first children born to the Blackwood sisters to exhibit no signs of deterioration, flourished while being raised by their maternal grandmother. Many believe that Ruth's death broke whatever spell or evil practice the sisters had used, which is why they survived. But in his last sermon, before being dismissed by the church elders, Reverend Miller offered an other reason. The only thing that broke the awkward silence of the congregation was Mrs. Miller leading her husband from the pulpit. The bargain is complete. 33 souls returned, 33 received. The Blackwell twins live because the exchange no longer requires deaths. Whatever came through the doorway is here now, walking among us, wearing human form, learning to be human. He didn't fight back. He was admitted to the state asylum in St. Louis the following week, where he stayed until his passing in 1892. Wilson's study in the 1,960 seconds revealed his final papers, which his wife had retained, but which had increasingly unsettling references to replacement children and the ones who came through the door. The daughter of Clara Jenkins was born in June 1888, and Martha Blackwood was there at her last birth. 3 days later, Martha was found dead in her farmhouse. The official cause, as recorded by Dr. Barr Harper, natural causes, likely heart failure. Sheriff Reed's private notes told a different story. Found Miss Blackwood seated at her table, a journal open before her, pen still in hand. No signs of struggle or distress. The final entry reads, "Ruth was right. The balance has been restored. My work is finished." Beneath the floorboards of the bedroom, we discovered 33 tiny objects wrapped in cloth, blocks of hair. It appears one from each deceased child. What purpose these served, I hesitate to speculate. Reed continued, "Most disturbing was what we found in the cellar. A door had been drawn on the earth floor in what appeared to be charcoal mixed with some red substance, blood, I fear. Around this door were arranged 33 small handprints, also in this mixture. The prints were too small to be those of an adult, yet there were no children in the house. The impression given was that tiny hands had reached through from the other side of this drawn doorway, leaving their marks in our world. The farmhouse's contents were cataloged, boarded up, and kept in the county records office. Reed's notes referred to a journal that was never formally admitted into evidence. Before historian Margaret Wilson found it in 1962 while studying the county's medical history, its location was unknown. The journal, which was severely deteriorated by time and moisture, included sporadic descriptions of the sisters' methods. Wilson's study, which was published in the Journal of Ozark History in 1964, suggests that the Blackwood sisters seemed to follow a set of beliefs that demanded harmony across worlds. A soul arriving from the opposite side was symbolized by each birth. The natural order would disintegrate in the absence of appropriate ceremony and eventual return. The sisters viewed themselves as defenders of cosmic balance rather than as portents of death. One legible passage from Martha's journal elaborated, "Mother taught us that the doorway has existed since time began. Some call it the veil between worlds, others the threshold of life and death. All misunderstand. It is not death that waits on the other side. It is something older than death, something that seeks entry to our world. The ancient pact was made by our ancestors. For each soul that comes through to be born, another must return. When this exchange is balanced, the doorway remains stable. When it falls out of balance, terrible things slip through. Things wearing human form, but empty inside, hungry for what they cannot have." Another passage, "The 33 are special, chosen for their sensitivity to the doorway. They can see beyond it, even as infants. This makes them perfect vessels for the exchange. Their souls return, carrying knowledge of our world to the other side. And in exchange we receive gifts, knowledge, power, abilities beyond ordinary humans. The replacement children born after the exchange carry traces of what came through when the 33 returned. This is the bargain. This is the balance." Entries that implied their mother, who was only referred to as "she who taught us," had engaged in similar rites in Virginia before to being expelled, were more unsettling. Before relocating to Missouri, the family reportedly practiced dark midwifery in several locations across the eastern United States. A particularly chilling note, written shortly after Ruth's passing, read, "R never understood the necessity of our work. She saw only the grief of mothers, heard only the cries of infants. She could not comprehend the greater purpose, that without the exchange, the doorway would break open entirely. What comes through in measured, controlled exchange is nothing compared to what would flood through an unbalanced door. Humanity has been protected by my lineage for generations. The price is high, but the alternative, unthinkable." It appeared from the journal's last partially readable pages that Ruth had become more and more disturbed by their actions. Martha wrote that, "R questions our purpose. She weeps for the little ones. She does not understand that they were never meant for this world, merely visitors passing through. We do not cause their deaths. We merely facilitate their return. Without us, the doorway would remain open. Worse things would come through." And the last note, written the day before Martha passed away. "The exchange is complete. 33 returned. 33 received. The doorway is balanced for this generation. Those who came through will live among humans, learning, observing, preparing for the next opening. I go now to join Ruth and Mother in watching from the other side. The next keeper of the door will emerge when the time comes again. The spiral turns. The balance continues." Both sisters attended the final delivery of the Blackwell twins, who survived to adulthood. Both returned to Camden County after serving in World War I. They didn't get married or have kids. They were quiet, well-respected neighborhood members who mostly kept to themselves, according to local sources. According to county records, Joseph Blackwell went on to teach in schools, and his brother Thomas started a prosperous medical practice. Both were renowned for their extraordinary skills. Joseph, for his apparent photographic recall and linguistic aptitude. Thomas, for his almost supernatural diagnostic abilities. Thomas frequently understood what was wrong with a patient before they stated their symptoms, according to locals. At the location of the Blackwood farmhouse, which had fallen years before, Joseph Blackwell, the younger twin, ordered a little stone memorial in 1937. The inscription simply said, "May they find peace." It is unclear if this was a reference to the sisters or their numerous victims. There were sporadic references to voices from the other side and visions of the portal in Dr. Thomas Blackwell's notebooks, which were given to the County Historical Society upon his death in 1956. He asked me whether I remembered being on the other side of the door before our birth, and in one 1942 post, he wrote, "How we sometimes know each other's thoughts, how we dream the same dreams on the same nights." He gave me a weird look and responded, "I do. I remember everything, and they are still waiting to come through again." I replied, I did not. Eventually, the area became part of the future Lake of the Ozarks State Park. During construction, the stone marker vanished, and its placement was lost until Wilson's investigation pinpointed the general region. Near the location of the old farmhouse, workers discovered a small subterranean chamber in 1962 while building a new Park Service road. There were 33 little bundles of fabric in a circle inside. Sheriff Reed's notes mention the identical bundles, although they are believed to have been destroyed. The things were thrown away as old trash by park personnel who were not aware with the area history. Months after the discovery, Wilson made an unsuccessful attempt to retrieve them. However, one employee kept one packet as a curiosity. He showed it to Wilson in 1965 while she was doing study. She wrote in her notes, "A small square of black cloth sewn shut with red thread. When held, it produces an unusual sensation, a vibration or pulse, as if something inside is still alive." The worker says that ever since taking it, he has had vivid dreams in which he sees a door standing open in the dark and hears children calling for him to come through. When Wilson's follow-up investigation in 1965 involved contacting descendants of families impacted by the so-called Blackwood curse, it was the last twist in the horrific tale of the Midwife sisters. A troubling trend became apparent. Every family that had lost a child born to the Blackwoods went on to have another child, frequently within a year, who showed exceptional skills or aptitude. In contrast to their contemporaries, these replacement children, as Wilson called them, exhibited high levels of intuition, exceptional intellectual prowess, or artistic talent. Throughout childhood, many people reported having vivid dreams about another location. A number rose to prominence in their respective disciplines, including doctors, artists, and inventors whose contributions revolutionized their fields. Wilson recorded interviews with 12 of these replacement children's ancestors. They all spoke of similar experiences, a feeling of being different from other people that cannot be explained, recurrent dreams of a doorway or threshold, and unique talents that appeared in early childhood. "I've always known I didn't belong here, not fully. Part of me remembers somewhere else, a place beyond normal human perception." A famous neurologist named Dr. Eleanor Richmond told Wilson, "The knowledge I've contributed to medical science doesn't feel like discovery to me. It feels like remembering." When funding was cut off in 1968, Wilson's research was abruptly stopped. Despite never being published, her notes and incomplete manuscript were preserved at the University of Missouri. Only pieces of her conclusions remained when the collection was destroyed in a 1972 flood at a storage facility. But those bits and pieces point to a theory that is more disturbing than coincidence. The pattern suggests not random tragedy, but selection. The Blackwood sisters appear to have been identifying specific children, those with particular sensitivity to what they called the other side. Their deaths facilitated something, perhaps a transfer or exchange. The children born afterward carried something with them: knowledge, abilities, awareness that should not exist in those so young. What were the sisters actually doing in those birthing rooms? What were they really midwifing into this world? A final letter written shortly before her funding was withdrawn. I begin to wonder if the story I'm uncovering is meant to remain hidden. 3 times now I've arrived to interview subjects who have suddenly canceled without explanation. My office at the university was broken into, though nothing was taken except my notes on the replacement children. Last night I dreamed of Martha Blackwood standing at the foot of my bed, warning me away from the doorway. Some knowledge, she told me, belongs only to those who keep the balance. I woke to find my bedroom door standing open, though I distinctly remember closing it before sleeping. If it weren't for an odd chain of events that started in 1985, over a century after the Blackwood sisters arrived in Camden County, the story of the sisters may have been completely lost to history after Wilson's research was stopped in 1968, and her records were damaged in 1972. A statistical aberration occurred in Camden County between 1985 and 1987, a 300% rise in twin births. During this 2-year period, 27 sets of twins were born, which is a record number for a rural county of its size, according to hospital data. Even more startling was the fact that the same midwife, Eleanor Black, who had just opened a practice in the region, attended all 27 sets of twins. After noticing the similarity and learning about Wilson's previous study, local historian James Holloway started looking into Eleanor Black's past. Early in 1988, the Camden County Gazette published a series of articles detailing his findings. Black lacked any credible medical qualifications. Although her documentation seemed genuine, it was not able to confirm it with the organization that she claimed to have received her certification. Even worse, Holloway was unable to locate any documentation of her life before coming to Camden County. Another disturbing fact that Holloway's inquiry revealed was that Eleanor Black's physical attributes, as described by her patients and one photograph that appeared in a local newspaper, remarkably resembled Ruth Blackwood rather than Martha. Holloway admitted that the striking resemblance in facial structure and characteristics between the photograph and the only surviving daguerreotype of the Blackwood sisters from the 1,880 could be a coincidence. Sarah Henderson, a patient, recounted a strange occurrence: 1,986 delivery of twins. Miss Black was always professional, but there was something about her that made me uneasy. During labor, she gave me a tea that tasted bitter and herbal. My memories of the actual birth are foggy, but I distinctly recall her whispering to my babies as she held them. Something about the doorway and the balance. When I asked her later what she meant, she smiled and said, "I must have been hallucinating from the pain." Before Holloway could go more into his investigation, Eleanor Black vanished. No forwarding address was given, and her rental house was discovered to be vacant. Her disappearance occurred on the exact 100th anniversary of Martha Blackwood's passing. The only noteworthy item recovered by the authorities during their search of Black's abandoned home was, based on unverified claims, a secret compartment beneath the floorboards that had 33 tiny bundles of cloth, much like those found at the original Blackwood farmhouse site in 1962. These packets were not mentioned in the official police report. Sheriff Michael Davis refused to provide any details when Holloway asked him about the disparity, saying, "Some things are better left unreported. Some things should stay buried." What happened to the 27 sets of twins that Eleanor Black gave birth to? In the 1,990 seconds, Holloway's follow-up study revealed that all 54 of the children were healthy and growing normally, indeed, extraordinarily well. These kids often scored in the highest percentiles on intelligence tests administered by the local school system. Numerous people had exceptional aptitudes in artistic expression, music, or mathematics. The Blackwood curse that had taken so many lives a century before was not evident in any of them. Even more peculiar, based on teacher accounts gathered by Holloway, these kids frequently displayed synchronized behavior, even while they were apart. They could complete each other's sentences, know what the other was thinking or feeling from a distance, and have the same dreams on the same evenings. According to linguistic experts who analyzed recordings, one pair of twins conversed in a language that no one else could comprehend, describing it as structurally distinct from any known human tongue. Holloway put forward a hypothesis in his final piece on the topic, which was released in 1995. If we accept the premise of Wilson's research that the Blackwood sisters were engaged in some form of ritual aimed at transferring something from one child to another yet to be born, then the pattern we see with these modern twins suggests an evolution of that practice. Rather than sacrificing one child to benefit another yet to come, perhaps this modern practitioner has found a way to split whatever essence is being manipulated between twins, allowing both to survive, while each carries half of whatever power or knowledge or ability is being transferred. He went on, "The question remains, who or what is Eleanor Black? A descendant of the original Blackwoods carrying on their tradition? A practitioner of the same obscure arts who recognized the significance of Camden County? Or something more disturbing, a return of Ruth Blackwood herself, continuing work begun a century ago?" Scholars mostly ignored Holloway's theory, dismissing it as pseudoscientific at worst and speculative at best, until Dr. Ella Morris of the University of Missouri Department of Anthropology started researching what she called statistical clusters of exceptional individuals across the Ozark region in 2010. His work was mainly forgotten. Several communities in Missouri, Arkansas, and Kentucky were found by Morris's research to have generated statistically unlikely quantities of extraordinarily brilliant people within particular generational cohorts. In each instance, she discovered a link between the presence of a midwife or birthing attendant who had entered the town just before the statistical abnormality started and left shortly after, as well as times when the twin birth rate was abnormally high. Morris cautiously steered clear of any conjecture regarding supernatural components in her 2014 paper, Genetic Exceptionalism in Isolated Rural Communities. The Midwife Connection, instead, concentrating on the potential that some midwives may have used unreported methods or traditional remedies that in some way impacted fetal development in ways that were advantageous to cognitive function. Michael Chen, her research assistant, interviewed a number of the now adult twins who were born in Camden County during the 1985-1987 cluster. His notes, which were appended to Morris's presentation, included a number of unsettling stories. A participant, Catherine Wells, told Chen, "My twin brother and I have always known we're different. We can sense each other's thoughts, feel each other's pain across distances, but there's something else. We both dream about the same doorway, a rectangular darkness that stands between worlds. Sometimes in the dreams we see our other selves on the other side, not our reflections, but the parts of us that stayed behind when we came through." Another participant, David Reynolds, reported, "My sister and I both have memories we can't explain, knowledge of things we couldn't possibly know, languages we've never studied but understand, scientific concepts we grasped intuitively as children. When we were 10, we built a working model of a device that our physics teacher said shouldn't be possible according to conventional understanding. We just knew how it worked. It's like we brought something with us when we were born, something from somewhere else." Nonetheless, Morris acknowledged the more unsettling ramifications of her findings in confidential letters to colleagues that were recently made public after her retirement in 2020. There is a pattern here that defies conventional explanation. These statistical clusters of exceptional births follow the movement of specific practitioners across geography and time in ways that cannot be coincidental. Whatever these women are doing, it appears to be part of a tradition passed down through generations, one that has evolved from the crude practices of the 19th century to something more refined, but no less unsettling in its implications. Are we seeing evidence of some form of human cognitive enhancement achieved through means outside established medical practice? And if so, to what end is this being done, and under whose direction? Another layer of the enigma was revealed in 2018 by Jessica Chen, a graduate student in Morris's department. She found, while looking through birth records throughout the Midwest, that many of the midwives Morris identified in her research had an odd thing in common. They all had names that contained the words Black, Wood, or Thorn, Black, Blackwood, Thornwood, Blackthorn, and so on. It is uncertain whether this was the result of a shared tradition's practitioners adopting a naming system or an actual family lineage. When the geographic distribution of these practitioners was plotted over time, Chen also observed that it showed a clear pattern, a spiral that moved clockwise over the central United States, making one complete revolution roughly every 50 years. Camden County, Missouri, located at the heart of this spiral. Chen's 2019 thesis stated, "The pattern suggests not random movement, but purposeful progression, as if these practitioners are following a predetermined path, returning to the same locations at regular intervals across generations." The symbolic implications of the spiral pattern are significant in many esoteric traditions, often representing cycles of death and rebirth, or the passage between worlds. If we are indeed observing a coherent tradition of practice moving through time and space in this manner, it raises profound questions about its origins, purpose, and continued existence in modern America. What was most shocking was Chen's finding hospital records from various points along this spiral pattern, which revealed clusters of twin births that resembled those in Camden County. The interval between each cluster is roughly 33 years. The number 33 recurs throughout this pattern, she said. 33 deaths in the original Blackwood case, 33 years between clusters of twin births, 33 sets of twins in each cluster. The significance of this number appears deliberate, though its meaning remains obscure. When Chen obtained a job at a prominent medical research institute in Switzerland in late 2019, her studies came to an abrupt halt. She had previously stated her intention to continue her study at the University of Missouri, therefore her departure was unexpected. Colleagues have tried but failed to get in touch. Chen's former roommate later told Dr. Morris that in the weeks leading up to her departure, Chen had been having vivid dreams of a doorway opening and voices calling her through. Her last email, sent to her faculty advisor the day before she left, was cryptic and said only, "The spiral turns again. I've been called to follow it." On several occasions, she had also claimed to have seen a woman standing at the foot of her bed, a woman who matched historical stories of Martha Blackwood. Dr. Morris made an effort to track down Chen in 2021 by contacting the Swiss Research Center, where she was rumored to have accepted a position. The answer they gave was concerning. Jessica Chen had never worked there. At the St. Louis airport, where surveillance footage showed her boarding a flight not to Switzerland, her trail came to an end. Camden County's nearest major airport, Springfield, Missouri, was the destination. The Blackwood sisters and their possible contemporary counterparts have not been the subject of any other scholarly investigations as of 2024. Local folklore and sporadic references in studies of Ozark supernatural beliefs are the only sources of the narrative. However, odd happenings are still being recorded near the original Blackwood farmhouse's submerged location. In one part of the lake, park rangers record a remarkably high number of unexplained incidents, including people experiencing vivid dreams after swimming there, electrical equipment malfunctioning, and abrupt temperature dips. We don't talk about it officially, but every ranger knows to be careful there, especially around dusk. Sounds carry differently over that part of the water. Sometimes you hear voices when there's no one around. Children's voices usually, laughing or calling out names. Ranger Thomas Wilkins, who has worked at Lake of the Ozarks State Park for 23 years, confided to a local reporter in 2022. Although official records show the farmhouse had been demolished before the lake was formed, a scuba diving crew investigating the lake bottom near the location in 2022 reported discovering the foundation stones of what appeared to be the original farmhouse. Their finding of what looked to be a locked stone room beneath the foundation was even more unsettling. They had to surface early because of equipment failure that prevented them from accessing a chamber. When they came back the next day with new tools, they found no evidence of the chamber or the foundation. In the months that followed, the Army Corps of Engineers lakebed studies found no buildings or irregularities in the region. Although one team member later left the region, allegedly choosing a job with a research center in Switzerland, the divers upheld the authenticity of their original results. Robert Jennings, the lead diver, revealed to Holloway what the official report doesn't mention is what we saw inside that chamber through a small opening in the stones. There was a door, not a wooden door, but a rectangle of absolute darkness standing unsupported in the middle of the chamber. As we watched, A small hand reached through this darkness. A child's hand, pale and translucent. Then another, and another, until dozens of tiny hands were reaching out toward us. That's when our equipment failed. To this day, I believe it wasn't coincidence. Something didn't want us there. In early 2023, Camden County Regional Hospital announced the birth of triplets, the first in the county's history, marking the next chapter in this century-long mystery. Dr. Eleanor Thornwood, a lady who had only been on the staff for 6 months, was the attending physician. The infants were all in good health, according to hospital records, but the attending nurse, who asked to remain anonymous when speaking to Holloway, reported seeing something strange through the partially open door of the examination room. She also mentioned that Dr. Thornwood had insisted on spending several minutes alone with the infants right after delivery, citing a need to conduct standard assessments. Dr. Thornwood was standing with the 3 babies arranged before her. She wasn't touching them, just looking intently from one to the other. Then she began to speak in a language I've never heard. Not Latin or Greek or anything medical. The lights in the room dimmed, and I swear I saw something like a doorway appear behind her, a rectangle of darkness floating in midair. Then she sensed me, watching, and closed the door completely. When asked what these tests consisted of, Dr. Thornwood was reported to have simply replied, "Ensuring the doorway is properly balanced." Citing personal reasons, Dr. Thornwood resigned from her position 1 week following the delivery. We don't know where she is right now. When questioned about the peculiar situation, the hospital administrator grew obviously uneasy and ended the conversation. The triplets' birth hospital records were reported missing from the records office later that same day. By all accounts, the triplets, who are getting close to their first birthday, are growing up normally, possibly even more so than usual. All 3 of them started speaking in complete phrases at 6 months, which is such an accomplishment that it goes against typical developmental benchmarks, their mother recently told a local reporter. She hesitated for a moment before responding simply that Dr. Thornwood had me drink a strange tea just before delivery. It tasted of herbs I couldn't identify. She said it would ease the pain, and it did. But afterward, I had the strangest dream of standing in a doorway between 2 worlds, watching something pass from one side to the other. I saw my children on both sides of the threshold, as if they existed in 2 places at once. When I told Dr. Thornwood about the dream, she just nodded and said, "The doorway stands open. The cycle continues." Most unsettling of all, the mother revealed that despite the 3 children's advanced verbal development, they occasionally speak in unison in what sounds like a completely different language. When they do this, she said, their eyes look different, older somehow, as if something else is looking out through them. It only lasts a moment, but it terrifies me every time. An odd trend is emerging across the county. According to recent hospital records, a rise in twin pregnancies among women who were in the maternity unit on the day the triplets were delivered. 7 sets of twins, all of whose mothers were in their first trimester, have been reported as of this time. Even though he no longer publishes his research, James Holloway, who is now in his 72nd, still recording these incidents. Some doors are better left closed. Some knowledge is dangerous to share, he said simply when a former colleague asked him why, adding, "I've learned that much from the Blackwood legacy." Midwifery services offered by experienced practitioner specializing in twin births. Contact E. Blackwood. The PAP's editor reported that the ad had entered their system without following the standard submission procedures. The odd ad first surfaced in the Camden County Gazette Classifieds in March 2024. They tried to track it down, but they couldn't find any documentation of who had planted it or how. The doorway stands between the worlds. The cycle turns again. 33 returned, 33 received. The balance must be maintained. The advertisement's phone number leads to a voicemail message that solely has a woman's voice delivering what sounds like a poetry or chant. How do we interpret these over a century-old accounts? A string of fortuities and legends adorned over many generations? Misunderstandings of natural but sad events through superstitious lenses? Or proof of something functioning at the edge of our knowledge? A history of practitioners working toward a goal that we can only vaguely and echoedly see? Maybe it's just a ghost story, a story that was recounted in an era before modern medicine to illustrate the grim realities of child mortality. It's possible that the statistical anomalies identified by Wilson, Holloway, and Morris are simply that anomalies, haphazard groups that human minds looking for structure and significance have linked into a story that only lives in the imagination. Or maybe there are doors between realms in the shadowy recesses of our planet. Maybe there are those that guard these boundaries, keeping a balance that is beyond our comprehension. It's possible that the Blackwood sisters and their seeming heirs are defenders of an old covenant that forbids something much worse yet calls for dreadful sacrifice. A statistical anomaly that has never been fully explained is revealed by Camden County's birth and death records from 1,885 to 1,888. 33 infant deaths after seemingly normal births that were attended by the same midwives, followed by decades of outstanding achievements by children born to the same families. Superstition, coincidence, or something more sinister that defies logic? They carried their secrets with them. The Blackwood sisters. What's left is retained by the lake's water. Some tales are difficult to wrap up. There are mysteries that would rather remain unanswered. Ultimately, we can claim with certainty that two sisters started giving birth in the fall of 1,886 inches, the rural outskirts of what would become Camden, Missouri. Youngsters perished. And in Camden County, something changed. Something subtle yet profound that continues to resonate across generations. On peaceful nights by the lake, pay close attention. Some claim that the gentle sound of women singing lullabies beneath the river is still audible. Songs for 33 kids who were never supposed to stay. Or maybe the wind is simply bringing echoes of a past we may never completely comprehend through the trees. There are some doors that can never be fully closed once they are opened.